Everybody, what's going on? Hellmite here, bringing you another video from Grab the Lantern today. First and foremost, I do want to apologize if you guys hear anything in the background. I do have some construction going on in the area, so you may hear some things. That is the construction, guys, so don't worry about that if you do hear it. And next, I wanted to talk about the my subject for today, which is something I've been thinking about for a little while now, which is how Riot are going to handle characters and character design and reworks in the age of Riot games, emphasis on the plural. As before now, as obviously all you guys know, League of Legends was the only game Riot had. It was the only game in the Runeterra IP, let's call it. So everything that happened in League of Legends was more or less that was the canon of the game. So if things change, then that's how the canon is going to change as well. So when, for example, Warwick got reworked from a guy cursed with lycanthropy from Soraka into a sort of hex tech, chem tech, alchemical experiment guy from Singe, well, that was a change in the fundamental canon of League of Legends. So that's all well and good. The biggest thing, though, I want to talk about here is that the Runeterra IP is no longer just League of Legends, and there are things we're going to have to consider moving into this new age. Now, obviously, Legends of Runeterra released earlier this year and has its own take on League of Legends and the Runeterran IP. In fact, Riot have said specifically that everything that you see in Legends of Runeterra is canon. So, Professor Von Yip, for example, is a guy who actually exists in universe in League of Legends canonically. So, we could maybe even see Professor Von Yip as a champion at some point in the game, which would be weird to think about. But a lot of the things in Legends of Runeterra, those are all considered to be canon. You also have Wild Rift, which will be coming out later this year. It's already started in its alpha, the mobile browser-based, or not browser-based, but the mobile game that Riot are putting out, the mobile version of League of Legends. That will also be coming out later this year. And Riot had some interesting thoughts about Wild Rift and the direction they were going to take characters. See, Wild Rift already has some tweaked character designs from the base game of League of Legends. If you look at the Wild Rift versions of Shyvana or Janna, you'll notice that their base character appearance is different. Janna is wearing slightly more clothing than she normally does, for example, and Shyvana is wearing full leg armor, as opposed to her current appearance where she doesn't have anything on besides boots, and then obviously the armor across her waist. Now, Riot essentially said that yes, as they're developing this game, they are going to make changes on character designs as they see fit. They also have more or less said that there are going to be skins designed for Wild Rift that are going to be different, that there's going to be balance changes that are going to be different in Wild Rift versus regular League of Legends, which makes sense as it's a mobile game, so different characters are going to be stronger in Wild Rift versus in Summoner's Rift because the control schemes are going to be different things are going to be better or worse as you go from game to game. However, this does have an interesting influence on what else might be happening behind the scenes with character design and in general with how these games are going to play. Because right now, Wild Rift is just a mobile version of League of Legends. The balance might be different, but that's fine. You still fundamentally know that Ezreal is Ezreal and the design is going to be the same. Now, the interesting thing about this, though, is that Wild Rift has more or less said, hey, we're totally fine with maybe changing our character designs as we see fit and as things may need to be changed in order for Wild Rift to work. They've also said that there will be different skins for Wild Rift versus the base game, so Wild Rift could come out with a skin line that base League of Legends does not have, and vice versa. And that also means that there may be a possibility for Wild Rift to have champions that are not actually in the base game of League of Legends. Now, this is a weird thought process to already have, because we're very inclined to just think of Wild Rift as League of Legends 2 or a different version of League of Legends, but there's a very real possibility that the game will diverge as time goes on. The other thing to consider as well here is that Wild Rift has different design needs. So if the Wild Rift devs, for example, say, oh, well, you know, we really don't like how Tryndamere is playing in this game mode because he's way too strong, he's able to do so many other things, etc., we need to rework him. Well, that means that Tryndamere in Wild Rift could be very different from Tryndamere in the base game of League of Legends. And this has some interesting implications behind it, as it means that, let's say, you have been playing League of Legends for a long period of time, and you finally got into Wild Rift, and you've decided, oh, hey, you know, I really like Wild Rift, I finally discovered it was a thing, let me go play it, and I'm going to bring out my main man, Tryndamere, because I love him in League of Legends. And then you play Wild Rift, and turns out the Tryndamere in Wild Rift is incredibly different from the Tryndamere that you're used to. Or vice versa, if you got into Wild Rift to start with and said, hey, I really like this Nocturne guy, I'm going to go play in League of Legends, and Nocturne is completely different in Wild Rift. And not even necessarily just in appearance, it could even be in kit. And that'll be a bit of an interesting thing to consider and a bit of an interesting take on things because, yeah, these characters might end up being completely different in Wild Rift than they are in League of Legends. The other thing to consider here as well is that as character designs change, as League of Legends inevitably updates its backlog of characters that look pretty bad or have outdated kits, that their appearances may necessarily change. And if that's the case, how is this going to affect games like Legends of Runeterra, where everything is canon? If League of Legends, if Riot Game comes out tomorrow and says, we're going to be updating Tryndamere, we're giving him a VGU. I know I keep going to Tryndamere, but he's the first one I can think of. We're going to be giving Tryndamere a VGU, and his visual appearance completely changes. They give him more furs to put him in line with the Freljord. They take away his horned helmet because that's a little stereotypical and not actually that great of a helmet because your opponent can grab those horns. But either way, that's beside the point. They changed Tryndamere. He looks different now. In Legends of Runeterra, Tryndamere's champion card will still look the same unless Riot change it. And because the design staffs are different, there's a very real possibility that they don't change the art on Tryndamere, which means that now League of Legends Tryndamere looks different from Legends of Runeterra Tryndamere. And if Legends of Runeterra Tryndamere is supposed to be canon, does that mean the League of Legends Tryndamere is now uncanon? How is that going to work? Unless Legends of Runeterra decides they want to be updating everything in order to fit in with League of Legends. So it's an interesting thing to think about, and I think it does have some possible problems for Riot going forward, as it will be difficult for them to maintain coherency across all of their IP, unless they have a really solid way of saying, as we update League of Legends, we'll update Legends of Runeterra, we'll update Wild Rift, etc., etc. It doesn't sound like so far, though, that they are attempting to go for that kind of a strategy. It really kind of does sound like they're saying, hey, we're going to be having all three of these games developed differently as we see fit. And it will lead to some divergence, and that, I think, is a bit of a problem for League of Legends. You have this Runeterra IP that you're trying to develop that is quite strong, I really do think. I think Runeterra has the possibility to be really strong and be one of those IPs that you consider in the future, that everyone's sort of familiar with, in the same vein that, like, everyone is familiar with Star Wars, for example. And a lot of things in Star Wars are very consistent. Darth Vader, no matter if he's in the comic books or in a TV show or in a book or in the movie, he always looks the same. There are certain things that are always the same about the character of Darth Vader when you see him. And League of Legends so far does not seem like they're going in that way, and that leads to a lot of disconnect between the player base and the IP. If I'm never sure when I load up a new Riot Games game that's set in the Runeterra IP, if I'm never sure which Tryndamere I'm going to get, you know, that's sort of an interesting experience, and it pulls me out of the IP, and it kind of prevents the IP from having the sort of timeless quality that it may need. For another example, Ashe right now is a very well-known, popular champion in League of Legends. I think almost everyone who's even remotely familiar with the game is aware of Ashe. But there's a possibility going forward that, let's say she got a VGU in the future, which is not too far-fetched to consider when you think about the fact that her design has not aged altogether too well. It's a little weird in some regards. Well, all of a sudden, one of your marquee characters may look different in some games versus the other. It's just these kinds of things that I'm considering that may give Riot some problems. Now, obviously, from a gameplay perspective, these are totally fine. You don't want Wild Rift to have to do everything that League of Legends does, or vice versa. But there is a cost that is being paid here, regardless of whether or not Riot are familiar with it or not. So I think it's very interesting to consider. I don't have a good answer for what Riot should do. I would say they should try to make sure things stay as consistent as possible in order to avoid the sort of situation I'm talking about, but at the same time, they don't seem to want to do that for various gameplay-related reasons. They do want to keep the player first, as it were. So, in that regard, it's you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't if you're Riot Games. And it's just interesting to think about for me, and especially as we maybe see more games set in the Runeterra IP going forward. Obviously, Riot Forge is a thing. We have the Legend of the Rune King, or I think it's just the Rune King game coming out. We have Chrono Break coming out later, I believe later this year, maybe next year. But either way, these games will be coming out and giving us a look at Runeterra. And again, if they don't perfectly line up with what we've come to expect from these games, well, how is that going to affect the reception of these games? How is this going to affect the things that Riot does going forward? We'll kind of have to wait and see, but it's an interesting thought experiment, and I would love to hear your guys' thoughts on any of this down in the comment section below. If you think it's a great idea for Riot to kind of branch out and do whatever they want with each of their teams, or if you do want to see them try to keep everything as consistent as possible in between their games, go ahead and let me know all that down in the comments section below. Thank you all so very much for watching. I do appreciate it. If you enjoyed today's video, go ahead and leave a like. And if you really enjoyed today's video, consider subscribing. I upload a video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days as well. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it. And I will talk to you all later.